Alright, so in this video we are going to turn an Excel sheet into an interactive web application using Python. On the website I have different options for filtering the chart and the KPIs. Additionally, we will include the toggle button to switch between the dark and the light mode. To create the dashboard we are going to use Taipy. With Taipy you can create full production ready web applications in Python. There is no need to learn HTML, CSS or JavaScript. So, if you're interested in starting with Taipy, this video is perfect for you. We will begin from scratch and I will walk you through each step. Okay, and without further ado, let us get started. First, let's take a look at the Excel data. Here we have the supermarket sales for different cities. We also have the information about the customer gender, the product, the total sales amount, the time of the purchase and the customer rating. At least those are the pieces of information we are going to visualize later in the dashboard. Okay. Next, we need to access this data somehow in Python. And for that, I will be using the myToolbar.Excel add-in. Full disclosure here, I'm the creator of the add-in. And the following function is only available in the paid version. However, you don't need to have the add-in to follow along. In just a bit, I will explain you how you can access the data in Python without the add-in. That said, if you want to use the add-in, you can find the download link in the description. So, all I need to do is click the Create Pandas DataFrame button and select the data range I want to convert. After hitting OK, the add-in has now created a new Python file in the workbooks directory. Before opening it, let me quickly rename it to main.py. Next, let me launch VS Code. Alright, so in this file, the add-in has already written the following lines of code for me to read in the data correctly. So it has defined the workbook path, the sheet name, how many rows it needs to skip from the top, which columns I want to use, and how many rows are included in my selection. As mentioned, you could have written the following lines yourself without using the add-in. Okay, next up, let me open a new terminal and see if everything is working as expected. To work with the Excel data, you need to have Pandas and Openpyxl installed on your machine. To install those packages, simply run pip install pandas and Openpyxl in your terminal. I have those packages already installed. So that is why I can directly execute the Python file. And as a result, we will now have our spreadsheet data in a Pandas data frame. Okay, with that in place, let's now create the web application. As mentioned in the intro, we are going to use Taipy for that. You can install it by running pip install Taipy in your command prompt or terminal. Once installed, let's import the package. Here we will need two things. First, from Taipy GUI, I will import GUI, and I will also import Taipy GUI Builder as TGB. With that said, let's create a very simple web page. First, I will define a page, and all the content we are going to write will go inside here. At the very top, I want to have a header. I can do that with the Taipy text element. Inside the string, you could also use emojis. If you're on a PC, you just need to press the Windows key plus period to open the emoji context window. From here, I will pick the bar chart, and the heading will be Sales Dashboard. Now, to actually make it a heading, I'm going to specify the class name. If you are familiar with HTML, you know that h1 is a heading, h2 will be a subheading and so on. Okay, and below the header, I will now display our data as a table. And now this is really important. To access the variable, you want to use curly brackets, but additionally, you also need to wrap it around quotation marks. Otherwise, it won't work. Alright, and now below our page, let's run the app. The following if statement looks a bit technical, but all it does is check if the script is being run as a main program. This means that if the script is executed, then the condition becomes true and the code inside the if block is going to be executed. Here we will now take our GUI object and place our page inside. And now we can use the run method, which actually has a couple of additional parameters we can set, like the title, use reloader and the debug mode. When we set the use reloader option to true, our app automatically reloads when we save our script. So especially during development, this is super handy. Additionally, if the debug mode is turned on, we will see the full traceback error log. Okay, and with that, let me navigate back to my terminal and start the app by running Python and then the name of the Python file. This will now run the app on your local host at port 5000. And as you can see, under the hood, Taipy is using Flask. So by now you should see your app automatically in a new browser window. Alright, so we have the title, our header and the table. And this table now is also interactive. So I can scroll through the entries and also navigate to the next pages. Now that it is working, let me place my browser and code next to each other. Okay, as the next step, let's create some KPIs, which we are going to display at the top of the page. For that, I will actually change the DataFrame name to data, and then instead of the table, I will use the text element again to insert a subheading. Now, I could use the class name h2 to create the subheader, but I just wanted to show you that you can also use Markdown. So by using the pound signs and the mode MD for Markdown, this will also convert the text to a subheader. Below that text, I will insert another text element where I am going to sum up the total sales of our data. And we can easily do that with Pandas by specifying the column and the aggregation method. Just remember, if you want to access the data, you need to place it inside the curly brackets and also put it in quotation marks. And for the class name, I will pick an h4 header. Okay, now after saving the file and reloading the website, we will now see the total sales. If you want, you can also add more text to it. So I will also write that the numbers are in US dollars. Okay, and now let me copy this and paste it 2 more times, because besides the total sales, I also want to show the average sales. For that, I just need to change the title and the aggregation method. And lastly, I will also show the average rating. So here we don't need the US dollar text at the beginning, and the column name is rating, and we will again calculate the mean. With that in place, let me refresh the website again. Okay, so this is looking good so far. But for the rating, I would also like to round the numbers. So within the curly brackets, I will use the Python round functionality. And to make it visually more appealing, I will also include a star emoji. For that, I will simply multiply the star emoji by the number of ratings. And to ensure to multiply it with a whole number, I'm using here an integer. And if I now reload the site, this is what it looks like. Okay, now that we have our top KPIs in place, let's take care of the different filters. Essentially, I want to filter the dataset based on the cities, customer types and genders. For that, I will use drop-down menus. But before placing the drop-down elements on the website, let me first get the unique values for each of those filters. So for the cities, I will use the Pandas unique method, and I want to return the result in a Python list. And now I will do the same for the customer types and gender. Once we have that defined, we can input the selection fields in our app. For that, I'm going to use the selector element. Now, here's a very important thing, and we will talk about that later in more depth. But whenever you later change a selection in the drop-down menu, you do not want to change the global variable cities, which we just defined. What you want to change is the actual state of that variable. For example, if multiple users go to your website and one user makes a change to the drop-down menu, then that selection should only apply to the current user and not to all the other users who might also have your website open. So the state is like a memory box for each person using the app. It keeps track of their choices. And from our selector, we want to get back the actual choice. And that is why I'm using curly brackets here again. If that doesn't make sense to you right now, then don't worry, we will come back to that later in more depth. Okay, and to populate the selection box, we can specify the list of values, which will be our global variable cities. Next, I will also define it as a drop-down box, allow multi-selection, and also specify a label. So when I now reload our website, we can see our selection box with the different cities. Now, when I change something here, nothing happens with our data above. For now, that's okay. We will take care of that later in the video. Next, I'm adding the select boxes for customer types and gender. After copying and pasting the fields and adjusting the variable names, our page now looks like this. Currently, everything is just in one column, and each element is placed one after each other, exactly like we wrote it in our code. However, I would like to have the KPIs in one row, and below that row, I want to have my filters. So to achieve that, we can make use of the layout element. Inside this element, we can specify how many columns we want to have and the size of each column. In my case, they should have all the same size. And within the different columns, I will now group my different KPIs. So in the first column, I want to have my total sales subheader and the actual number, and we can do that with the part element. Likewise, I will do the same for the other elements, so that we now have 3 different columns. And to see the result, let me reload the website. Alright, and this is what it looks like. Now I want to apply the same also to my selection fields. So, back in the code, I will use the layout part again and indent my code. This time we don't need to add the additional part element since we only have one element within each column. That means when I refresh it now looks like this. So far so good, but I would actually like to use the full width of the column for the filter. To do so, we can also here define a class name, which I will copy and paste to the other selections as well. Okay, so if we now take a look at our page, we can see the different filters are taking the entire width of the column. And now below the filter, I want to have two charts, one to display the sales by hours and one for sales by product line. But before we can create our charts, we will need to do some calculations in Pandas. So if you're already familiar with Pandas, feel free to skip ahead in the video. If not, let me go back to my Excel file, and this time I will create a Jupyter notebook. Like before, I just need to select the cell range, and after hitting OK, I have a new Jupyter notebook in my workbook. When I open the notebook, I again have the code to read in the Excel data as a Pandas data frame. So let me go ahead and print out the first rows of the data frame. For my first chart, I want to calculate the sum for each product line. For that, I will select the Pandas column I need, in this case product line and total. When I execute the cell, I get back our data frame, which only now consists of two columns. Next, I want to group it by product line. Every time you use group by, you also need to specify the aggregation method. In my case, I want to sum up the values. And just like that, we now have the sales by product lines. Lastly, I will sort the values and also reset the index. So currently the product line is the index, but after resetting it, it will be again a column. Okay, so this will be the data set for the first chart. For the second chart, I want to group the sales by hour, and if we take a look at our data, we actually do have the information of the customer purchase time. Yet this is currently treated as a string. So when I try to extract the hour information, I get an error message. We first actually need to convert the column to a datetime object. To do so, we can write it as follows, and to make it easier later, I will just create a new hour column, which we can now see here. Okay, and just like before, I will now group the sales by hour. If you want to dive deeper into Pandas, I also have tutorials on my channel. Feel free to check those out. And with that said, let's switch back to our web application. Here I will now insert the code we wrote in the Jupyter notebook. That means first I will add the hour column to our dataset and then also create two more data frames. One for the sales by product line and the other one that holds the data for the sales by hour. To visualize these data frames, I will first create two more columns under the select boxes. And then inside those columns, I will use the Taipy chart element. Under the hood, Taipy is using Plotly. So you can basically use the same Plotly parameters also here in the chart element. The first one will be our dataset. On the x-axis, I will display the hour, and on the y-axis, the total sales amount. And it should be a bar chart with the title sales by hour. Next to it, I will display the sales by product line. So the parameters are the same, but this time I will also set the orientation to horizontal. Alright, and with that in place, let's check out how it looks on our page. Currently, you can also see some empty spaces here. And I'm not quite sure if that is actually a bug or not. But if you refresh the website one more time, the charts will actually display correctly. So no need to worry. The only thing we now need to take care of is the interactivity. Because if you change any filters here, neither the charts nor the top KPIs are updated. So let us take care of that. And since we won't be inserting any new elements on the web page for the rest of the tutorial, let's stop the server by pressing Ctrl and C on your keyboard and close the browser so that we have more space for the actual coding part. Now the idea is as follows. Whenever we change our selection, we want to filter our actual dataset for the KPIs and the datasets that are being used for the charts. And we can do that with the onChange parameter. So whenever we are changing the filter, I want to trigger a function called onFilter. And I want to do that for all my selection fields. Obviously, we don't have the onFilter function yet. So let me create it here on top of our script. Now, before going much further here, let me give you a simplified example of what is going to happen. Let us take a look at the following app. Here I have to find a number on top. Then inside the page I am displaying the number, and below that I have a button. The button has an onAction parameter. So when it's clicked, we will trigger the onAction function up here. And here's the trick. Instead of manipulating the global number variable, we will only increment the variable of our state. As mentioned earlier, the state is the current connection we have to our website. It is only valid for our connection. So imagine you have two website visitors. Here on top, when I hit the increment button, we will see the notification and you will see that the global number variable has not been changed. It is still 0, but the state has been updated to 1. And when I click it again, the state number is now 2. And even if I refresh the site, we can still see our state number. And that is quite significant, because if you are used to Streamlit, due to the rerun mechanism, the state would be 0 again. Okay, but as I said, this state is only valid for one connection. If someone else is on your side, they will have their own state, even if I refresh my browser here. Okay, with that concept in mind, let's switch back to our app. In our case, whenever we change a selection, we are going to trigger this onFilter function. The first thing I want to check is if no selection is made. In that case, I will just simply return an error message. For that to work, we also need to import notify from taipy.gui. Alright, and just like in the simple example I showed you, I also now want to adjust the state of our data frames. So the data frame we use for the KPIs and also the other two data frames for the charts. For that, I will create another function called filter. And in here, I will pass the values from our selection box. Now, all I really need to do here is to simply filter our data frame, which I'm doing right here. And once I have my filtered dataset, I can also use it for adjusting the chart. So let me include the code we wrote earlier. And here I just need to adjust the name. Instead of data, we now want to group the sales data of the product lines and hour on our filtered dataset. And lastly, I will return all 3 data frames from this function. Okay, and that's basically it. Next, I just need to make sure to now use our filtered dataset in the KPIs. So let me adjust it here, here, and also here. Alright, and whenever we run the app, I also want to apply the filter already. And with that in place, let me navigate back to the terminal and rerun the app. So once the app is loaded, we will see that every time I change a filter, the KPIs and the charts are updated accordingly. And in case I don't have anything selected, we will get the notification message. Great, and with that, let us move on to the last section of this tutorial, which will be the styling part of our app. First, let's tackle the chart for the sales by product line. As you can see, the labels are not clearly visible. One trick would be to push the chart a bit more to the right side. And since this is a Plotly chart, we can use the layout parameter for that. So back in my code editor, we will now define a dictionary of my style. And I'm using here a left margin of 100 pixels, and I will also remove the X and Y axis titles by setting them to an empty string. With that in place, I will now include these additional parameters in my charts. So after refreshing the page, we can see that the chart now has some space to breathe on the left side. And as I said earlier, don't worry about the empty space here. This seems to be a bug, I guess. If you refresh it one more time, the chart should be displayed correctly. Okay, next up, let's format the top KPIs a bit better. Basically, I want to add a 1000 separator and only show the whole number without any decimals. For that, I have created a little helper function which returns a formatted string value. And I can now take this function and apply it to our total and average sales. For that, I just need to include it in the curly brackets. And now, after a refresh, the total sales looks much cleaner. Next, let's also add a toggle button to switch between the dark and light mode. And this is super easy. You just need to add the toggle element and set the theme parameter to true. And that is all there is to it. Now, back on my page, I have this cool toggle button to switch between the different modes. And if you really want to further customize your app, then I would recommend checking out the Style Kit section of the Taipy documentation. There are a ton of customization options available. For this tutorial, I will show you a couple of those. For example, in addition to making this text a header, you can also center the text and add a padding to the bottom. So the P stands for padding and the B for bottom. And there are some predefined paddings from 1 to 6. The higher the number, the more space you will add to the element. So when I now navigate back to our page, you will now see some space below the title. And I want to do the same for the other elements. So for our layout part, I will also add some padding. and I will apply the class name card to our KPIs. The card is basically just a container to separate it visually from the other elements. Next, let me also add some padding to our selectors. You can, of course, also play around with some other values and really customize the app the way you want. Okay, and lastly, you may have already noticed, but at the very bottom of the app, there is by default a watermark from Taipy. You can actually remove that by setting the watermark option to an empty string. Optionally, you could also add some overall margin to the page, like for EM. This means the space around the edges of your page will be 4 times the size of the base text. So when I reload the site, you can now see that all the elements are pushed a bit away from the border, and also the watermark is not visible anymore. Okay guys, and that is pretty much it. As I said, sometimes when I resize my browser window, the charts are not displayed correctly. In that case, you just want to give it another quick refresh. And as I mentioned, the cool thing is that even if you refresh the site again, it will still remember the filter selection, which is captured in the current state. Alright, and this is how you can turn an Excel sheet into an interactive web application. In the next video, I will also deploy the website to the internet so that you can share the link with anybody, because right now it is only available on your local machine. If you don't want to miss that video, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. And with that said, thanks for watching and I will see you in the next video.